If you want to focus your efforts on being a cavalry main player in Rise of Kingdoms in 2025, then this is the video for you. Today I'm going to guide you guys from start to finish, from being a brand new player in pre-kvk1 all the way into end game Season of Conquest, all while focusing on cavalry. But before we jump in, of course, what's going on, guys? Cheers. As you guys know, I am a partnered creator with Rise of Kingdoms, which means they support a few videos on the channel every single month, just like this one, but the most important support comes from you guys dropping a thumbs up and subscribing down below. Also, I put timestamps on all my videos so that way you guys can jump to the part of the video that you care the most about. Okay, now the first thing I want to touch on here really briefly is, what is a main? What does it mean to main a troop type in Rise of Kingdoms? Well, the definition has changed over the years, but right now I would argue that if you're a free-to-play player, then maining a troop type would be something along the lines of running 2 armies of that troop type with a single supporting army from each of the other troop types. So in this video we're going to be talking about running 2 cavalry armies with 1 infantry army and 1 archer army to supplement and support those 2 calves, because let's face it, some of the best commanders in the game are going to be commanders of other troop types, and they're just so good that you can't possibly run a pure cavalry account or a pure archer account, a pure infantry account. It just doesn't make sense to do that. You're leaving a lot of value on the table if you go those routes. Now, if you're not a free-to-play player, let's say you're a low, medium, or high spender here in Rise of Kingdoms, then that means that you're going to be able to run at least 5 armies, if not more, if you're spending a lot on crystal tech. So consider the tips in this video as sort of a baseline foundation that you should strive for, and then from there you can dial it up a little bit more with your emphasis on calves. Now, a few days ago I did post a video going over what I think the best troop type is in Rise of Kingdoms right now, and the question is, are cavalry a good troop type to focus on, especially if you're a free-to-play or low spender? And the answer is yes. The reason that cavalry are so good to focus on for a large chunk of the player base is for a few reasons. First of all, calves historically have been very good in the open field. I would say really, besides like 2024 as a year being dominated by infantry, a majority of Rise of Kingdoms history has been dominated by calves in the open field, and that's for a few reasons, but primarily it's because they've often hit just as hard, if not slightly harder, than other troop types, while maintaining the highest march speed in the game. They've been the fastest on the battlefield, and so you get a lot of the benefits of the other troop types while just being faster than them, which means you can get in and out of engagements on your own terms, and it helps you to avoid being out of place on the battlefield. And so historically, calves are a very safe investment for most players, and if you want a in-depth detailed breakdown guide as to why I feel that way, check out the video I posted recently. Okay, let's talk about civilizations for cavalry units, and honestly this is very cut, dry, straightforward. If you're a brand new player, start as China. When you do all of your major building upgrades and utilizing this building speed upgrade, then in the end game there's 2 major civilizations that you can switch to. Germany is great when you are not fighting, when you are not in a PvP scenario. Germany is great for a few reasons. First of all, you have a passive troop training speed bonus, and you also have a 10% action point recovery bonus. This is especially good for free-to-play and low spenders who are going to be getting a lot of their value out of their action points, killing barbs, doing barb forts, marauders, all that sort of stuff. Very good to be Germany. When you are actually in a PvP scenario as a cavalry player, there are no good civilizations for open field fighting that have a cavalry special unit, right? Of course you could stay as Germany in a pinch, but really there's not much to love here. Really what you would want to do is, if you are low on speed ups, especially healing speed ups, then you might want to play as France. If you are below VIP 15, right, so that is VIP 14 and lower, you might get a really good use out of the hospital healing speed bonus here, plus the troop health is universal. The downside of this is that you don't have a cavalry special unit, and you don't have any march speed or anything else. Like the wood gathering speed is not very good. For a majority of players in the end game for calves, you're going to be running the Ottoman Empire, and the reason for this is, yes, I know it is technically an archer civilization, but the 5% march speed is incredible for open field fighting, and your 5% skill damage is going to be very, very powerful. That's easily like the single best buff that you can get for your cavalry armies, at least at the time of recording this video, and that has been the case for quite a while. But again, I want to be clear, this is an end game civilization, right? So this means that you've already finished your city hall to level 25, you're working on your tier 5 unit upgrades. Ideally you'll have already had all your tier 5 unit unlocks by the time you're really starting to fight. So for kvk1 and things like that, don't worry about this stuff. Just stick to China or Germany, whatever you're going to be in the early game, and then switch to civilizations like the Ottoman Empire or maybe even France for the very end game. So we're talking like season 3, season 4 and beyond of kvk. Next, let's talk about city skins. And in 2024, the developers actually changed how city skins work. Now they no longer have a downside, which is very nice. This means that at the very beginning of the game, if you were able to get your hands on the Hidden Lotus city skin, then that means you're gonna have a slight advantage by going the cavalry route, which is amazing. But I will say this is not a very good city skin, so if you didn't get this at the beginning of the game, then don't worry about it at all. It's not a big deal. As you can see, I've been playing for 6 years. I don't even have this. It literally makes no difference to me whatsoever. Now when it comes to early game PvP city skins, you're going to want to look for a city skin that gives you 5% cavalry health or 5% cavalry defense. So for example, we have Spring Blossoms right here. There might be a chance for you to get this relatively soon, once again, because I'm recording this in February. Spring is coming up soon and there might be a spring event that gives you this. But if not, you could look for things like the Magpie Bridge. This is a great city skin as well. Or you could even go for something like the Temple of Artemis, cavalry defense, Summer of Passion. This one's not very good, but you could do something like Soul Villa if you have a Halloween skin, the Mighty Forest, Golden Eye. These are all very good early game cavalry city skins. I would say just getting something with a cav buff is really nice. Now it's also worth noting that in the off season, you could rock something like the Song of the Depths. Now this I actually have transmogged to look like the Soul Villa because I think this looks really cool, but the Song of the Depths gives you a 5% cav attack, but also a 5% gathering speed, which is very nice. Now of course, once you get into kvk, you will have the ability to unlock the Twilight Fall city skin. This is probably going to be your first legendary city skin and is also the one that you're going to use the most of, for the exact same reason that you're running the Ottoman Empire civilization. You get 5% skill damage here, and again, a lot of the commanders we're going to talk about later still do an insane amount of skill damage for cavalry, even though they are going the combo damage route in the future. Most likely, we'll talk about that later, but Twilight Falls is most likely going to be the staple #1 best city skin that you're going to be using for cavalry in the end game for the time being and the foreseeable future. If for whatever reason you're watching this video a year and a half, 2 years from now, and cavalry are all in on combo damage, then you may want to consider going for the Divine Abode. This is also from the Lost Kingdom shop, and this gives you 10% cavalry defense and 15% resource production, which is shockingly really good. You can use this for PvP, but you can also use this in the off season for just more resources, which is really nice. I personally want to get my hands on this at some point, but either way, those are going to be 2 of the main city skins that you're going to be rocking in the end game. I do just want to touch really briefly on Zenith of Power city skins because they are the talk of the town a lot of the times, and they are quite good. The only downside is that for most players it's going to be very expensive and difficult to get your hands on a Zenith of Power city skin, and for that reason it's not really worth touching on here. If you're able to compete for a Zenith of Power, amazing, try to get your hands on it if you can, but really these are meant for rally players, garrison players, players that are big spenders with lots of activity. Now that's not to say that free-to-play players can't win Zenith of Power, and in many cases they actually can, depending on their kingdom, but for most players it's not really worth going for them, especially because it's a gamble. You could always get knocked out of the top 10 and that really sucks. Okay, now let's start talking about commanders, and the first place that we should start is working your way up to your first ever kvk. Which commanders should you be focusing on if you are a cavalry main player going into kvk1? And the answer, well, really there's 2 main answers, and if you really want to go the pure cavalry route, what you could do would be focus on Belisarius as your primary commander, which is not really going to be the case for any other kvk, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And you'll pair him with Baibars, and the reason for this is because this single pairing using both epic commanders is going to be most likely the fastest thing on the battlefield in kvk1, because Belisarius has the mobility tree, and as we talked about before, calves are already very fast. You also get 50% march speed for 10 seconds when you exit combat, and 30% cavalry defense. And so a skill like this is very powerful in the early game for free-to-play players, because they can easily get out of combat that they don't want to be in when, you know, kvk1 is often dominated primarily by cavalry players, but you'll also see infantry there as well. And so this is really, really nice. Also, the fourth skill here, dealing 25% more damage to troops with less than 50% units remaining, is insanely powerful. This means that as a very fast march out in the field, you can try to pick off some of those players that have maybe yellow or red health, and you're really going to punish them with that extra damage. As far as talent builds go, I would go for something along these lines, because this is going to give you a lot of the best march speed talents that you can get. So for example, we're getting the 1 point in march speed over here in the peacekeeping tree. You're getting the march speed from lightning charge. You're getting the march speed here as well, which is very nice. You grab hasty departure, so you get 60% march speed after leaving a building or resource point, which is crucial for jumping in and out of resource points, and you're just constantly going way faster than everybody else. Alacrity is nice, so you can't be slowed. Plus you grab a ton of the points here in the cavalry tree. Emblazoned shield and disarm are both great. You get undying fury for the extra rage. I have 1 point left over. I put it into swiftness here, so that way you get more march speed when you take skill damage. That's nice. If you want to like really go all in on march speed, then what you could do is maybe remove some points from disarm and then put them here into swiftness, or you can put them into equestrian excellence. This gives you march speed when you're hitting something, so this is great for being aggressive, but it's not good for running away. So really I would look at it as equestrian excellence being a more pursuing the target aggressive build, or you go for swiftness if you want to run away, be more defensive, be more passive. And I would say a solid middle ground would be just grabbing undying fury and disarm. You kind of get neither of those, but at least you're going to be performing a little bit better on the battlefield and having a stronger debuff. And then like I said, Baibars goes behind Belisarius because his expertise gives him a 5 target 1000 damage factor AoE with a 50% march speed debuff for 2 seconds, which is very good. This is going to mean that you're going to be able to stick to that target even more. They're going to be super slowed down, and a 5 target AoE on an epic commander is very, very nice, especially in kvk1. Plus he gives you 20% attack, which you really need for your Baibars. He doesn't give you any attack himself, and you also get a 50% march speed when you exit combat here, plus a tiny healing factor. So combine that with the 50% march speed on Belisarius for leaving combat, and all of a sudden you can leave combat whenever you want. Now the other army that you could build for kvk1 is actually not a cavalry army. It would be a Sun Tzu primary with a Ethelfled secondary, and the reason that you would do this is strictly because it just hits really hard. If you have the Sun Tzu primary, you have a very powerful 5 target AoE and a rage reduction, followed by a nice 5 target AoE on Ethelfled that is a half circle with a very powerful debuff here as well. You take 10% less damage, which is insane for an epic commander. 10% health here, 20% skill damage to complement both Sun Tzu and Ethelfled. You're dealing more damage, you're dealing more damage to slowed targets, you're taking less counterattack damage. All in all, this is a great all-around commander pairing for kvk1, especially because you also get this skill tree on Sun Tzu as the primary, which is very good. I would go ahead and grab Feral Nature, so you're casting your active skills as fast as possible. Then you can come up here and grab Strong of Body. You also can grab Fleet of Foot, and you can put 1 point into Snare of Thorns. This is going to get you all the march speed that you can over here, which is very nice, and you're going to be able to slow your target down a little bit, which is very good, because remember, Ethelfled deals 20% more damage to targets that are slowed. So this is just giving you a nice little slowdown, which we love to see. All in all, this is your other great pairing that you could run in kvk1. So that's going to be, obviously Ethelfled is, you know, you're only going to get this if she's expertise, so keep that in mind, and that might be challenging for people if you're just going into kvk1, depending on how far and how early you progressed through the expedition. But otherwise, you're going to be using 3 epic commanders here, so Sun Tzu, Belisarius, and Baibars, with Ethelfled being completely free to play as a legendary commander. Also, using her as secondary earlier on in the game allows you to save on stars and experience tomes that you could use for commanders that are just better. The last thing I'm going to touch on here is Minamoto and Cao Cao, because these are your early game legendary cavalry commanders, and of course Minamoto cannot be used as a free-to-play player. You're simply not going to get your hands on him, whereas Cao Cao you can. Now Cao Cao is very attractive in the early game because he is a legendary cavalry commander. He can be used for PvP and for PvE, but the downside of Cao Cao is he's a single target damage commander, and it's really hard to get sculptures of him in the early game unless you're buying the daily special offer, which I don't really recommend unless you're like a medium medium or a high spender, then that might be worth it, because you will use Cao Cao to rally barbarian forts throughout the rest of your Rise of Kingdoms journey. So it's not like he's going to be a complete waste in the end game, but he certainly falls off after KVK1, that is for sure. Now, if you did get super lucky from gold keys for whatever reason, and you did get a ton of sculptures of him, at what point should you use Cao Cao over a commander like Belisarius, or really he would be probably a secondary to a commander maybe like Baibars as the primary? And the answer to that is probably the first skill to 5 and the third skill to at least 3, but ideally you'd want it to be 4 or 5 as well. That's when you're really going to start noticing Cao Cao hitting much harder in KVK1. That 20% attack is like minimum, because that's what you get from Baibars, right? Otherwise you might as well just run a Baibars. So I mean, the amount of people that are going to have that's literally hundreds of sculptures, right? It's not probably going to happen, so just keep that in mind. But I did want to at least mention it here for those that maybe spend a little bit in the game. And then of course Minamoto is great for low spenders. For $30, 30 US dollars, you'll be able to buy the VIP bundles that will give you at least enough to get a 5511 Minamoto, which is great. That's going to give you a super powerful active skill, and it's going to give you a bunch of attack and march speed here. Plus he's got the skill tree, which is very good, and he's great for peacekeeping. All in all, you'll notice that Minamoto kind of dominates the battlefield in KVK1, and that's for good reason. It's because he's cheap, he's easy to get, he's a legendary, and he's a great commander to get in the early game. Later down the line, you're going to be able to unlock the museum relics for him, which give him an insane amount of stats, which might help you transition into the end game. Not to say that he's good in the end game, but like 60% of stats is quite a bit, and it will at least help a little bit in that transition. Plus you can use this when you're inevitably going to be rallying barb forts in the end game with your Minamoto. If you do have Minamoto at least at 5511 in the early game, then you could run a Baibars primary with Minamoto secondary. The only reason that I would say Baibars as primary is because he's epic, and so it's easier to get him to 6 stars and he takes less experience. But if you know you're going to bring your Minamoto to 6 stars anyway, then you could just use him as primary. They have basically the same talent trees. They have the cavalry and skill tree, which is all that you really care about, and you would do something like this. This applies to both Minamoto and Baibars as the primary commander. Okay, now that we've talked about which commanders you should be focusing on for your first KVK, let's talk about your first legendary investments for your account, because those aren't necessarily the same things, unless of course you're buying Minamoto, and Ethelfled doesn't really count because you get her for free. We're talking about which commanders should you spend sculptures or gems on for your account as a cavalry main player in Rise of Kingdoms in 2025. And at the very beginning of the game, there's going to be 2 Wheel of Fortune commanders that come around, and those 2 commanders are Richard I and Yi Seong-Gye. These are 2 early game legendary commanders that show up on the Wheel of Fortune, Richard being the first one. And this actually is, despite being an infantry commander, going to be your first legendary investment in Rise of Kingdoms. And when I say that, I do not mean that you're going to expertise Richard. Absolutely not. What I recommend is you summon Richard from the Wheel of Fortune, and you spin his Wheel of Fortunes just enough to get his first skill to 5, and then the rest of the skills here can stay at 1. And the reason for this is because Richard is actually a pretty good commander when it comes to PvE content, and by that I mean player versus environment, which is, you know, battling the barbarians out in the world, doing different events out on the open field. And he's also decent for events that use a tank. So examples are Sunset Canyon, Lost Canyon, Golden Kingdom. There's lots of events where you might really want a tanky commander, and Richard's powerful healing is quite good here. He's got a debuff. The rest of his skills are a bit lackluster. Obviously he's more so an infantry commander because of the talent tree, but you can use him as a secondary to really anybody to just add a bit of healing to them. Now I want to be very clear, Richard is not a great commander for PvP. So that is to say that it's not good really to use Richard to fight other players. The only exception to that is if you are a heavy spender in KVK1 and you max Richard the first. Most players should not be doing that. That is for players who are, you know, really spending a lot in the game, and they're going to be maxing out his wheel and things like that. But for most players, I would say get his first skill to 5, then just unlock these other skills, leave them at 1, and that's going to be your first legendary investment, and he's going to help you through a lot of different events here in Rise of Kingdoms for years to come. When it comes to Yi Seong-Gye, I'm a bit divided these days because a lot has changed. I would say you definitely want to at least summon him when he comes around. If you see that Wheel of Fortune with Yi Seong-Gye, you should summon him. Okay, you might as well well do it just to have him on your account. And even though Yi Seong-Gye is actually quite good in Rise of Kingdoms, I mean, he's actually very good in the early game, he's very good in KVK 2, and then in KVK 3 he's solid, but Season of Conquest he really falls off a bit, right? So he actually, you know, that is to say that as an early game commander, he's pretty much one of the only commanders that last a really long time, even if he isn't necessarily meta, like single best March meta in the end game. But the downside is that his powerful AoE turns into a circle with higher damage factor at expertise, which means it costs 690 legendary commander sculptures to really get the full value out of Yi Seong-Gye. Now I want to be very clear, you can still use Yi Seong-Gye without him being expertise. Okay, I think this is a complete mischaracterization of him to say that he's only usable at expertise. That's ridiculous. We use fan shaped commanders in Season of Conquest all the time. A lot of the best commanders in the game only have a fan shape, so to say that Yi Seong-Gye is only usable with the circle is not true. But it is worth noting that he's much better with the circle. He's much better. That is the appeal of Yi Seong-Gye. That's what makes him so good for chaining barbarians and all of those things. So the reason that I mention that is because investing in Yi Seong-Gye in 2025 and not expertising him is more viable now than ever. And the reason that I say that is because of the commander swap event that we get when you exit KVK 2 and you start to unlock some of these, you know, Season of Conquest commanders you might not know. You're like looking at my screen like, who even are these guys, right? You'll see them later down the line, but the point is that a semi investment in Yi Seong-Gye actually isn't the end of the world these days, because as long as you get this first skill to 5 and some amount of investment in the second and fourth skill, especially the fourth skill is really good, you can just use him as a fan shaped like AoE commander as a secondary to whoever you want. And then, you know, if you don't end up maxing him, that's fine, you can just swap him to something else when you hit KVK 2, and then at least you'll have used him in the early game with his powerful skills. I think that's perfectly reasonable. So what my recommendation for now for Yi Seong-Gye is going to be is that if you are a mid or high spender, definitely get Yi Seong-Gye. If you are a hyper active free-to-play player and this is like your second, third, fourth account, okay, and you know exactly how the game works, you know what you're doing, and you know that you're going to be chaining with Yi Seong-Gye because you're able to spend like 4+ hours a day passively playing ROK, then great, get Yi Seong-Gye, expertise him. For everyone else, I would say if you want to fight in KVK 2 and 3, then you should also get Yi Seong-Gye, and just understand that he's best at expertise, but even if you don't get that expertise, you can still swap him for something later down the line, at least in KVK 2, or at the end of KVK 2 I should say. So all in all, I would say right now it's actually the safest time to invest in Yi Seong-Gye pretty much ever, because you can just swap him away, and we'll talk about that later in this video. Moving into KVK 2, you have two choices for commanders to sort of work on, and if you want to be a cavalry purist, Saladin is really your only choice here. He comes around on the Wheel of Fortune, which is nice because back in my day he was actually a Mighty Ace Governor commander, but regardless, he's a Wheel of Fortune commander that is actually pretty good. You can use him at 5511 or ideally 5551, and you never have to expertise him. By the way, it makes no sense to do that pretty much ever for anybody for any reason. And honestly, you know, you could run something like a Saladin primary with an Yi Seong-Gye secondary and just run it full of cavalry units, and that's going to be a solid cavalry march for KVK 2. The downside of this is that, first of all, I don't know exactly how far into KVK 2 you get the cavalry wheel, so like keep that in mind. And second of all, Saladin does not age well at all, and so he must be swapped. Like if you're going to invest in him for KVK 2, you have to swap him. You have to get rid of him for Season of Conquest because he's just not usable there anymore, unfortunately. And so that's why I don't love the Saladin investment, but I did want to at least mention it here because players, you know, this is a cavalry guide and some players just want to always play as cavalry for their entire like playthrough. The real best choice here would be something like Alexander the Great, right, who's infantry, and you know, in the same way you would run Alexander the Great primary with your YSG as the secondary, and that's going to be your KVK 2 march. That is arguably the best open field KVK 2 march these days. It's just so powerful with Alexander the Great. Of these two, you know, who would you rather have expertise? Probably the Yi Seong-Gye, because you can use him for more things, and also like just having the guaranteed getting this fourth skill and the powerful AoE bonus bonus. Very, very good stuff there. The Alexander the Great, he does have a nice bump here with the debuff for the enemies, but all in all, if you did like a 5511 or a 5551, something like that, that would be your great you know, kvk2 March, Alex with YSG. And then again at the end of kvk2, you can swap both of these commanders to something else. And honestly, right now I think is a good time to talk about the legendary commander swap event, because I've alluded to it already so much in this video, and this is a big thing that has changed since the last time I made a guide video like this. So the legendary commander swap event is a very important event that will only come around one time for players on their account. The way that you're going to get access to the commander swap event is in two different ways. First of all, if you're a brand new player to Rise of Kingdoms and you've never had this event yet, then this event, as far as I know, according to the developers, it will arrive 3 days before the end of season 2. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's probably coming up pretty quick if you're a new player, so you want to prepare for this, and I'll show you the sort of rules here on the screen as you may not know them. I've also made a ton of videos about this event in the past, so if you want to know more in depth, go ahead and check those out. If you are way beyond season 2 and you've never seen this event, and maybe you're just coming back to the game, then you will get this event showing up upon your return to the game. Okay, so it shows up, it's only around for 5 days, and this is like a huge lifesaver for returning players. When you come back to the game, you'll have 5 days to do this, and then after that it's gone again forever. Okay, so either way, you want to make the best out of this event, and the way that you're going to need to do that is by saving a ton of gems for this. Okay, now you don't need all 120 to make really good swap progress for your account. Again, I will point you towards some of my older videos covering the swap event on my channel, but the point is that you take one commander that you have some investment in, one legendary commander. So in this example, as we've talked about in this video already, that's either going to be your Saladin, your Yi Seong-Gye, or maybe your Alexander the Great, or maybe if you got really lucky, maybe it's a gold key commander, right? Regardless, you're going to take the commanders that you have the biggest investment in, and you're going to swap them for a season of conquest, or I should say a season 3 and later commander. And the reason that this event exists is because some of the newer commanders that they've added into the game over the last like 2 or 3 years are just so much better than the earlier game commanders, the gold key commanders that you would start the game with, right? And so this event exists as a way to bridge the gap between new players and old players, and it lets you basically exchange some of your early game commanders for late game commanders because of how much better they are. Okay, with that being said, you do need to own the commander that you're swapping to, and for that reason the game gives you a cute little event called the Gathering of Heroes, and this is paramount for getting your hands on these end game legendary commanders. And so what we need to talk about here is, as a Cavalry main player, you know, you've just completed or you're ending season 2 and this event comes around, you have to be prepared for this. Okay, and so which commanders should you be swapping to when this event comes around? Well, first of all, King Arthur. This is your #1 most important recruit from the Gathering of Heroes event. This commander is arguably the best commander in the game at the time of recording this video. I know some players still think that it's Liu Che or Zhu Liang. That's fine, I'm not going to argue with you. You might be right. Okay, you can make an argument for any of them, but for open field PvP, I would say that Arthur is easily, you know, a top 2 commander in Rise of Kingdoms, period. Okay, he's going to cost you 100 of these event points. Okay, and you can get these in a variety of different ways. They are quite difficult to get, by the way, so just keep that in mind. But Arthur is the #1 commander you want to get your hands on, right? So if you expertise Yi Seong-Gye in the early game, then you could arguably swap that Yi Seong-Gye for an expertise King Arthur. That's incredible, right? You literally just got one of the best commanders in the game for that swap cost. Now the downside of that is that that swap is going to be very expensive because it's expertise, so you'll have to do the math and see if that's something that you can actually afford from a gem value perspective. But once you've committed to getting King Arthur and swapping for him, who should your second swap be, right? Well, really, a lot of these commanders are not very good, right? They're really not very good. You could make the case for William, you could make the case for Belisarius, and some players may even try to make the case for Zhang Yu or Attila, but honestly, none of them are going to be super valuable to you as a brand new free-to-play player. Okay, really, some of the best commanders for Cavs are actually in phase 1, but you can only get these after you've recruited at least 2 more commanders, right? So you've unlocked your Arthur, now you'll need to recruit at least 1 more commander before you can get your hands on these. Okay, and in this phase one, there's two commanders that I think are the best to focus on, right? The game suggests Nevsky over Huo, and some players do prefer Nevsky over Huo, and that's fine. I will say though that Huo hits harder, like just straight up, he just hits harder, right? So who knows how both of these commanders will age over time. Historically, Nevsky has aged super well, whereas Huo, you know, all it will take is a better single target damage commander to come out, and then he's probably on the bench. But regardless, my point is that of these three, you know, the one that I think will probably stick around the longest, honestly, is Joan of Arc, right? Her 3 target AoE is, you know, it's slightly aged, but the fact that her 4th skill lets her cast it twice every other skill cycle is just insane, right? So every other skill cycle, it's basically a 4,000 AoE, which means on average it'll be 3,000. Like, that's crazy, right? It's crazy. I know that's napkin math, I know that's not exactly how it works, but it also has, you know, a damage bonus, a rage gain, like there's buffing happening here as well. Like, all in all, she is great, especially as a secondary. Some players use her as primary. Regardless, these 3 commanders, one of these 3 are going to be the second commander that you try to get in the cavalry tier. But because you can't do that without unlocking another commander first, you have to start looking at some of the other troop types for which commanders you should be getting, right? And if you look at infantry, there's not a great choice here in this commander lineup. You look at archers, again, really not a great choice here. If you look at leadership, all of a sudden, I mean, Philip is actually looking decent. Now, normally I wouldn't recommend that a player get Philip so early in their playthrough in Rise of Kingdoms, but like, you just don't really have a great choice here, to be honest with you guys. Like, in terms of actual open field meta, who are you going to get? I mean, you might want a William Wallace. Maybe you might want a Shajar. If you want to play it safe, you could do the William Wallace or Shajar. But the thing that I like about Philip is that he's leadership, and so you can literally use him with anybody else. He can be a cav commander, he can be an archer commander, he can be an infantry commander, he can literally do all of those things, and he gives you a ton of stats for whichever troop type plus the march speed. It's kind of nuts, right? So to me, you know, your first swap is going to be Arthur. Your second swap should either be Philip is the safest one. The best one would probably be either William Wallace or Shajar. I'm leaning more towards William Wallace for sure. So those are going to be your two. If you are able to get a third, then amazing. I would say go ahead and grab probably Huo or Joan of Arc. Those are my two recommendations. Really, Huo is going to be great for your King Arthur, especially as like a single cav march. That's going to be insane, right? Joan of Arc is going to be great. You could do Joan of Arc with King Arthur as well, Joan being the primary here, but either way, you know, one of these two I would say is your best bet for your second cavalry that you recruit. So again, Arthur is a no-brainer. Then you have to decide, do you want Philip, who is maybe less than ideal, but you could literally use him anywhere, or William Wallace if you want to build that infantry march. And then after that, you're going to choose between Joan of Arc or Huo. I would say go for Huo if you want the single best cavalry march in the game. Go for Joan of Arc if you want a very powerful cavalry march but makes it easier for you to branch out later. That's what I would recommend. Okay, now that we've covered the commander swap event, what commander pairs should you be focused on building going into Season of Conquest? Okay, now we're going to talk more in depth about equipment in just a minute, but the good news is that in kvk 1 and kvk 2, a lot of the early game equipment that you're going to be getting is going to be the windswept set. Okay, and this is going to be great for both infantry and for cavalry. And so a lot of your early game equipment pieces, you know, if they're windswept, then they're already great and optimized for infantry or cavalry. So with that being said, as I mentioned earlier with the commander swap event, you're gonna have at least King Arthur, right? At least King Arthur should be a commander that you get, whether you know, swapped a 5511 for him or a 5551, or if you had enough tickets and gems to do the full expertise swap, that's great. Your second swap will have either been something like Philip, because he was the only other one that you could get access to, or maybe it was William Wallace, like I said, or maybe if you were able to get 3 commanders from the Gathering of Heroes, maybe it was, you know, Joan of Arc, or maybe it was Huo, or maybe you weren't able to do any of that and you just were forced to keep your either Alexander the Great or your YSG. No matter what commanders you have here, okay, let's talk about the first army that you should get your hands on as a cavalry main in Rise of Kingdoms in 2025, and to me that's going to be the Huo King Arthur. Okay, I think this makes a lot of sense. The Huo as the primary hits really hard. He has the skill tree. They're both very fast. The stat distribution between these two is insane. You have a lower rage requirement with Huo as the primary for the first part of battle. Everything about this pair has synergy. It is incredible. Okay, and again, going into Season of Conquest with that swap, you should already have some decent investment into your King Arthur, and so really the Huo is the main thing that you need to focus on. From here, once you build this set of commanders, the question becomes, do you build a second set of cavalry commanders, or do you move over to something like an infantry set of commanders, for example? And if you want to do sort of the hand-me-down equipment progression instead of like dismantling purples and things like that, then of course you could do another cav commander pair as your second set. Personally, if you compare the second best cavalry army to the first best infantry or archer armies, it's really hard to justify going for a second cav set. I know from a progression perspective it might make a little bit more sense, but for me, I would recommend players going for an infantry commander set as their second pair of commanders. Okay, so first of all, Liu Che. No matter what you're going to be pairing with here, Liu Che is the answer. Okay, Liu Che is going to be the #1 best infantry commander in the game right now at the time of recording this, and I will say sometime in May we're probably going to be getting more infantry commanders, so if you don't want to miss that, you want to subscribe down below and click the bell, because it might be the case that an even better commander comes out for infantry. Not sure. I made a video predicting that most recently, so check that out on the channel if you want to know my thoughts and opinions on the future of infantry, but for right now, Liu Che is the man. Okay, that being said, if you still have your Alex investment from KVK2 for whatever reason, you just didn't swap him to Arthur, or you didn't swap him for something else, you swapped your YSG for Arthur, whatever, there you go, you're done. You actually just run these two and you're great. I mean, you really would want the expertise on Alex to do this, especially, you know, you would want to have the museum relic upgrades, because those are incredible for him. He gets 20% infantry defense and 6% normal damage taken reduction, which is just very, very good. So all in all, like, if you have that, you're golden. If you swapped away your Alex, that's fine. Then you have a couple of different options. First of all, if you grabbed the Philip, then great news, you just run that, and this is basically the same thing as the Alexander the Great pairing, right? So this is again another reason why I said grabbing Philip is so versatile early on, because boom, now you've got a literal meta open field infantry pairing right here, and you're good to go. Likewise, if you grabbed William Wallace, this would also be your place for your William Wallace. Okay, now if you didn't get any of those commanders, like you don't have any of them on your account, what would I recommend that you do? Well, I would say there's a couple of commanders that you can consider investing in. First of all, the Wheel of Fortune will give you CPO Prime, who's great. You would do CPO Prime as the primary, you do your Liu Che as the secondary, and this pairing has been tried and true for over a year now. I mean, you have double AoE here, you have a great debuff on CPO and March speed on both of them, you have health on CPO to complement, you have attack here as well, which is great. Like, everything about this pairing is incredible. Besides that, you could try to get your hands on Ragnar Prime. Ragnar Prime unfortunately does not come around as a Wheel of Fortune commander, but you can get him from the Sovereign Keys, so that's going to show up in your tavern. Okay, so your legendary chest, you can get him from these keys as well, which is nice. There you go, right there. You can guarantee to unlock him after 200, which is very, very good, so we love to see that. Other way you can get him is through the daily special offer. He will show up here eventually. It might not be right at the launch of, you know, going into Season of Conquest, but he does show up here, so that is another way you can get your hands on him, which is quite nice. The only reason you would consider Ragnar Prime over the CPO Prime is strictly because he just hits a little bit harder. He doesn't have the debuff that CPO has. He has a debuff, but it's not on the active skill. But regardless, his active skill just hits a little bit harder, and so like you might just go that route over the CPO Prime. If you can get your hands on him, this would be another great strategy. But all in all, whether, you know, no matter which of these commanders that you do, and again, I want to emphasize Philip is also a great choice here. Okay, this is going to be your second investment. I think infantry is the way to go. Really, again, it's up to you which of these two you prefer, and really I probably should extend this to include all of them so you have an idea. Okay, from there you either want to go for another cavalry march, or you want to branch out to an archer march. Okay, and for me, I would say at this point, you know, the cav march is going to be really easy to go for, because again, you could just take your equipment and armaments that, you know, as you're upgrading your equipment and upgrading your armaments, you're going to have older equipment, older armaments that's kind of just sitting around doing nothing. You could obviously dismantle some of it, some of the equipment. You know, don't dismantle legendaries, but purples and things like that you can always dismantle. But you know, if they have a special talent on them, you don't have enough blueprints to get that back, right? So if you want to do some hand-me-down things like that, then I would say your next pair is going to be a cavalry pair. Okay, and your second pair for cavalry is going to be something with Joan of Arc Prime, and by that I mean you actually have a few different options here. Okay, first of all, if you did go for the Philip and you're not using him with infantry, then what you could do is something like this. You would have your King Arthur as the primary with your Philip as the secondary, and you would have your Huo with your Joan of Arc, and bada bing bada boom, you're popping off. The downside to this though is that the formation that you need to run this army effectively is not the same formation that you're going to be getting for everything else pretty much, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but this is a route that you could go. Now if you don't have the Philip, or he's already occupied with something else, then in that case you could then go ahead and get somebody like Nevsky, and you can run the Nevsky Joan. The Nevsky Joan is going to be, again, tried and true. She's going to be great with behind Nevsky, and they've been good for years now. They're showing their age a little bit at this point, mainly Nevsky in my opinion, but he does have a really solid debuff on the active skill. The defense reduction is insane. He's got a ton of march speed, a nice distribution of stats, and he gives a ton of skill damage to Joan as the secondary. The downside, there's really no instant proc here, and the AoE is on the secondary. It's a little bit slow. It's not perfect, but you know, neither is the Huo Arthur. You've got a secondary here that's AoE, right? So all in all, this is most likely the route that you're going to be going if you're going to be running two Cavs. Like, this is the easiest, like most slam dunk obvious thing to go with. And just to play it safe, I'll move these down here so you guys understand that we're talking about two Cavs, one infantry, and then from here it's kind of a no-brainer. Your last march is going to be an archer march, right? And You Get Yi Seong-Gye with Hermann Prime is the way to go. You Get Yi Seong-Gye as an expertise is great. You don't really need the expertise on Hermann Prime, honestly. You can keep him at 5551. Same thing like with Nevsky. You do want the expertise on Nevsky. You do want the expertise on the Huo. You do want the expertise on King Arthur. The Joan does not need to be expertised. For her, you would want her to be a 5515, so 5 on the first skill, 5 on the second skill, 1 on the third skill, 5 on the fourth skill. Really the most important skills here are the first and the fourth. If you get those to 5, you're golden. However, the other two fall is whatever, but of these two, obviously the second skill is much better, right? She gets march speed and attack. That's amazing. Third skill kind of sucks on Joan, to be honest with you. It's not great, but all that to say, you don't need the expertise here. As long as the first and fourth skills are at 5, you don't need the expertise here. Just keep that in mind. And so really, Joan of Arc Prime and Hermann Prime are like the two places that you can really save some sculptures here, because they just don't really benefit that much for being expertise, to be honest with you guys. Like I mean, of these two, I would rather expertise Hermann Prime for sure, but like you just don't really need it. CPO Prime, really you don't need expertise with him either. Honestly, a 5551 is fine with him. So that's another place you might be able to save a couple of sculptures depending on how you're doing it. But all in all, these are your first 4 marches that you're going to go for as a cavalry main, right? So we have 2 cav armies, 1 infantry, 1 archer, and then from there you can decide what you want to do with your 5th army. Now I don't want to get ahead of myself here, because running 4 armies implies that you've got at least 4 legendary pieces of equipment for each army, right? Like that's kind of what you want as the minimum there, and you've got decent armaments for 4 different armies. That's really hard, right? And so to push that to a 5th one might be really difficult. Also, to assume, you know, we're already talking about thousands of legendary commander sculptures here, right? So we're talking very far into the future for you. If you're a brand new player, like this is going to be maybe like a year or 2 years out, right? Like we're talking pretty far out as far as thousands of sculptures, right? So keep that in mind here. The 5th army, I'm not even gonna touch on, right? And the reason for that is because, you know, if you're a new player, by the time you get to having a 5th army, this is going to change. There's going to be new commanders in the game. The meta is going to change, whatever. Second of all, you might not have the equipment or armaments or commander sculptures to build a 5th. You can use this 5th slot to grab runes. You can use this 5th slot to reinforce rallies, garrisons, to farm a nearby node to free up teleport spots, right? There's a lot you can do with your 5th army slot that is productive, that isn't necessarily a fighting march, right? Like it's expensive to fight with 5 armies all the time if they're all tier 5. It's very expensive. So keep that in mind. There's a lot you can do with that 5th army slot that doesn't involve just fighting. If you want to know my, you know, best 5 army lineup right now, I recently made a video talking about the best 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 army lineups in Rise of Kingdoms. Okay, check that out. It's got King Arthur in the thumbnail. It's a very recent video. It's from February of 2025, so check that out. That will help you out a ton if you need progress past this point. Okay, now that we've gotten the commander upgrade order out of the way, let's go over your equipment upgrade order. And as you can see on the screen here, this is sort of like the first build that you want to focus on. Okay, you have a 2-piece Vanguard set. These are both green. They have great bonus stats here. Then you're going to have 3 windswept pieces, so the chest, gloves, and boots boots are all windswept, and then you're gonna have the expedition war helm, and all of these with a special talent for cavalry is going to get you 5.5% attack, 20.5% defense, and 14% cavalry health. This is an incredible distribution of stats for calves in the early game. Like, for how cheap this is amazing. This makes calves really good in the early game. Plus you're going to get some bonus march speed from the windswept set as well, which is really nice. From here, the first few pieces that you're going to upgrade are actually those windswept pieces. The Dark Lord's Blessing as a chest piece is amazing, gives you a ton of defense. The Cloud Racers give you a little bit of extra attack, which is not preferable, but since you're going to be replacing the gloves anyway with the Iset Sufferance, you're going to be losing the set bonus for the March Speed set anyway, the windswept set. And so all in all, this is going to be your next milestone that you want to reach here. 17% attack, 25% defense, 11% health. Next up, you are going to replace the green Vanguard set. You're going to go for the Heart of the Saint. We love this piece because it gives you a ton of cavalry defense when it's special talented, or a purple piece. And then finally, we're going with the Gladiator for the cavalry health. Very good stuff here. One blue piece, 11.5% attack, 35.5% defense, and 14.5% cavalry health. From here, you're going to upgrade your boots. You're going to go for the boots of the Hellish Wasteland. Those are going to give you some nice cavalry health here. They probably won't be special talented because they are legendary. And then you're going to go for the chest piece of the Hellish Wasteland. So you replace those two purples, and now you've got 4% attack, 25% defense, and 36% health, which is beautiful. Now the next pieces that you upgrade here really depend on a few things. First of all, how lucky are you with your crystal keys, and also, have you been winning kvks? Have you been able to get those kvk pieces from your kvk shop, right? That's really going to make a huge difference. And first of all, you would want to, if you can, upgrade your helmet to the Pride of the Khan. Okay, this is probably, again, not going to be talented, but if you can get your hands on this from the kvk shop, that's amazing. It's going to give you way more defense than the blue helmet we were talking about before. Expensive, by the way, so just keep that in mind. And then, as I said before about the crystal keys, you definitely want to get your hands on Navarre's Control. These gloves give you some nice cavalry health from the crystal keys. Again, even without the special talent, it's going to be nice there. And as you can see with the stat distribution, we have 0 attack, 32% defense, and 40% health. Around here is when I would start to consider adding these legendary accessories as well. Getting these is going to be really nice. The Silent Trial is amazing for reducing the target enemy's rage, and Ancient Stratagems just gives you more troop capacity, right? Which is just literally more damage. Like, that's literally what that means. You may even consider getting these a little bit sooner as well. Like, if you can't get the kvk helmet, for example, like, you could go for this stuff. This exact upgrade order from, you know, purples to legendaries it's a little bit fluid. It's a little bit flexible depending on what you have, what you need. So just keep that in mind. From here, you can upgrade your weapon to the kvk weapon. If you've been performing in kvk well, you can get your hands on it. I would go that route. And now you've got a nice distribution of stats here. 25% attack, literally just from that sword alone. The Sacred Dominion, it's amazing. 15% defense, 40% health. Very nice stuff here. And then the final piece that you're going to upgrade is the Gladiator over to the Ash of the Dawn. And the reason for that is because it's literally like, it's like what, 1.5% better when it's untalented, right? So keep that in mind. Like, it's only a tiny upgrade over the Gladiator. The advantage to the Ash of the Dawn is that you can start to add the iconic stats, right? And that's something that I haven't touched on yet, but really, as you're getting these pieces, you want to focus on, first you want to do the health pieces, then the defense pieces, then the attack pieces. That is kind of the best way to go here. So at this point, we would have 6 health, 6 defense, and 6 attack. Okay, 3 attack from the weapon and the gloves, 3 defense from the helmet and the chest, and 3 health from the boots and the legs here. From here, the legendary accessories that you get really depend on, you know, which commanders you're going with, but most likely you are not going to regret the ring and the horn. Most commander pairs, that's the way to go, and that's going to bring your iconic health up to 12, and now you are popping off. And finally, last but not least, let's talk about formations and armaments. Okay, now obviously the progression of your armaments is really tough because it is RNG. Anytime that you get an armament, the stats are randomized, and anytime that you transmute those armaments, the stats are randomized, right? So it's really hard to give you guys a guide for armaments, but a couple of things that are worth noting. First of all, unless you're running the King Arthur S primary, you're going to want to be using the wedge formation. This is going to give you 5% more skill damage, and if you can pull out the victory in kvk, you can grab yourself the Hunter special inscription here, which is extremely good, especially with King Arthur as the secondary. So that is, you know, a couple of guaranteed things that you can work towards. Obviously you don't have to work for the wedge formation, you just slap it on there and you're good to go. That being said, if we come into the state forum here and you look at your dispatches, what you should probably set is the wedge formation, the arch formation, and the delta formation. This is great for cavalry players because literally all of these can be used for a particular army. So of course any skill damage army is going to use the wedge formation, any combo damage army, which is what King Arthur is when he's primary, is going to use the delta formation. And then you have the arch formation here, either for infantry mainly or as a backup for cavalry. So you might, you know, if you get lucky, you get some really good arch formation for calves, then you can run King Arthur as primary with the arch formation instead of the delta formation. It's not as good, but it's still, you know, better than nothing, right? And also again, you're making progress on that infantry march as well, which is really good. So these are the preferred formations, I would say, for a cavalry main player. In the early game, when you first get your hands on the formation choice chests, you're going to be opening them up for wedge formation. Okay, getting the wedge formation is the most universal formation in any troop type, because all troop types have some form of meta skill damage commander pairing, right? Whether it's, you know, the calves that we talked about who are with Arthur, or it's infantry being, you know, a Ragnar Prime with Liu Che or a CPO Prime with Liu Che, right? Obviously Liu Che does not benefit from wedge formation, but the other one does. You could still use it, which is nice. Obviously any archer march, You Get Yi Seong-Gye with Harman Prime, it's going to use wedge formation, right? So wedge formation is the number one thing that you want to be opening here. Once you have a decent wedge formation set up for all your different troop types, then you could start to branch out into opening up arch formation and delta formation, right? Delta formation is if you really want to go for that King Arthur primary and the combo damage, and sort of the future of calves is probably going to be combo damage, right? And so starting that earlier would be good. Or, you know, if you want to start building out a Liu Che smite damage pairing or army, then you can open arch formation. And, you know, again, if you get cav stuff here, you could use it with your King Arthur for the meantime. Now, if you guys didn't know, formations and armaments do have a wish list system, which effectively is like a pity. Okay, and you can choose which of the 4 armament slots you want to put on your wish list. And what this means is after you wish list an armament, all wedge formation special inscription armaments you acquire are guaranteed to be your wished armament. Additionally, after you obtain 10 wedge formation rare inscriptions, you're guaranteed to receive your wish listed armament with a special inscription. Now, the Epics of Olympia is probably the worst thing that you can put on your wish list because it's Hunter, right? And you could just literally buy Hunter from the KVK shop, so you never want this as your special inscription. Likewise, Banner of the Pantheon actually can be obtained from the shop down here. If you come into the courier station, you go into the armament shop, you go over to Superior, you'll see here that balance can be obtained literally for the legendary Banner of the Pantheon. Now, this is extremely expensive and it's going to take you a very long time to get here, right? So, you know, keep that in mind. It's going to take you a long time to get here, but at least, you know, eventually you will get a legendary inscription for that slot for at least one of your armies, right? So keep that in mind. And with that being said, then really you have 2 choices for your wish list. It's either the instrument here or it's the medal, right? And so it's up to you, whichever one is, you know, worse for you. Right now, my Chorus of Olympia is like pretty good. It's decent at least. And so for me, I put the wish list on the honors of the Pantheon because this is pretty bad, right? It's not horrible, but it's pretty bad. So those are the 2 that I would recommend. And honestly, for me, it seems like the medal is just the rarest one. I don't know why. It's just the hardest one. You could also go through and kind of look at the bonuses for each of these. Intrepid is insane. 10% skill damage is amazing. Unstoppable is good as well, but I'd rather just the flat 10%, to be honest with you guys. And honestly, I just get fewer medals than anything else, so that's why I did that. So that's kind of my guide to you. Anyway, guys, that's gonna do it for today's video. We have walked you through from the very start of your Rise of Kingdoms journey, from your commanders and your equipment and everything, all the way to the end game Season of Conquest, the legendaries, the equipment, the armaments that you should be focusing on at the end game. And so if you made it to the end of this video, hopefully you found it useful or enjoyable, and if you did, please drop a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel a ton. It pushes this video out to the algorithm so other Rise of Kingdoms players might see it. While you're down there, consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video, and comment down below your thoughts on everything we talked about in this video. Do you agree or disagree with some of my commander choices or the you know, equipment pieces or anything like that we talked about? Let me know in the comment section below. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.